Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood in the center of the massive chamber, feeling tiny under the glowing crystal ceiling that stretched high above her head. The Grand Assembly of the Galactic Council was the most important place in the galaxy, where 47 different alien species made decisions that affected billions of lives. Today, they were deciding humanity's fate. The chamber was built like a giant bowl, with seats rising up in circles around the speaking floor. Each alien representative sat in their own special area, designed for their unique bodies. The blue-skinned Zephyrians floated in water tanks. The rock-like granite lords sat on heated stone platforms. The insect-like hive queens hung from silk webs near the ceiling. All of them looked down at Elena with expressions she couldn't read on their alien faces. Supreme Chancellor Vex Thera rose from her throne at the highest point of the chamber. She was tall and thin, with silver skin that seemed to glow in the soft light. Her voice echoed through the chamber as she spoke in the old ceremonial language that all council members had to learn. "The charges against the human species are serious," she said. Her words translated instantly into Elena's earpiece. "Excessive aggression in expanding their territory, creating weapons of war when the galaxy is at peace, building thinking machines that could threaten all life, and worst of all, changing their own bodies with metal and circuits, violating the natural order." Elena kept her face calm, but inside she felt angry. The humans had done nothing that other species hadn't done before. They had explored new star systems, yes, but always peacefully. They had built artificial intelligence, but only to help with farming and medicine. And the cybernetic implants that the Council called unnatural had saved millions of human lives from disease and injury. But Elena knew this trial was never really about evidence. It was about fear. The other species were afraid because humans learned too fast, adapted too quickly, and asked too many questions about why things had to be the way they were. "The evidence speaks for itself," continued another representative, a floating jellyfish-like creature from the depths. "Humans have built more warships in 50 years than most species build in 1,000. They refuse to limit their population growth. They reject our guidance on proper development. They are a threat to galactic harmony." Elena wanted to speak to defend her people, but she knew it wouldn't matter. The decision had been made long before this trial began. The Council had already decided that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed freedom. One by one, the representatives voted. The jellyfish creatures voted to contain humanity. The crystal beings voted for containment. The plant-like tree speakers voted the same way. Every single species voted against humanity. By unanimous decision of the Galactic Council, Chancellor Vex Thera announced, "The human species is hereby confined to their home system of Sol. A quarantine fleet will be stationed around their star system to ensure they never again threaten the peace of the galaxy. Any human ship attempting to leave Sol space will be destroyed." Elena felt the words hit her like a physical blow. Humanity was being imprisoned in their own home, trapped forever in the small corner of space where they had been born. She thought of the human colonies that had already been established in other systems. Would they be cut off from Earth forever? What about the human traders and diplomats scattered across the galaxy? But as the aliens celebrated their decision, Elena noticed something they had missed. The small device implanted behind her ear was receiving hundreds of coded messages from across the galaxy. The messages were short and encrypted, but they all said the same thing. "Eclipse protocol is active. The Armadas are already moving." Elena almost smiled despite the terrible situation. The aliens thought they were so clever, but they had made one crucial mistake. They assumed humans would wait for permission to defend themselves. For 30 years, while human diplomats had attended council meetings and tried to play by alien rules, human engineers and military officers had been preparing for this exact moment. Deep in the outer edges of the Sol system, where no alien sensors could detect them, massive fleets of human warships had been built in secret. The Council thought they were trapping humanity in a cage. They didn't realize they had just awakened a sleeping giant. Elena touched her earpiece and sent a simple coded reply to the messages she had received. Message received. Earth stands ready. Then she turned to face Chancellor Vex Thera. "I will carry your decision back to my people," Elena said calmly. "But I want you to remember this moment. You have judged humanity without truly knowing us. You have condemned us for being different instead of trying to understand us. History will remember what you did here today." The Chancellor's silver skin seemed to shimmer with amusement. Human, your species will have no opportunity to make history beyond your small star system. The galaxy will be safer without your chaos and violence. Elena nodded politely, but inside she was thinking about the secret reports she had received over the years. Reports about alien species being forced to give up their resources to the Council. Reports about colonies being abandoned when they became inconvenient. Reports about entire civilizations being relocated when they refused to follow Council orders. The Council called it peace, but Elena knew the truth. It was control, pure and simple. The aliens had created a system where they stayed in power by keeping everyone else weak and dependent. They preached harmony while practicing oppression. As Elena walked out of the chamber, she passed by the other alien representatives. Some of them looked satisfied with their decision. Others seemed uncomfortable, as if they knew they had done something wrong but felt they had no choice. A few even looked afraid, though Elena couldn't tell if they were afraid of humanity or afraid of what would happen if they had voted differently. Outside the chamber, Elena's security escort waited for her. They were professional and polite, but she could see the pity in their eyes. They thought she was walking to her doom, carrying news of humanity's defeat back to Earth. If only they knew the truth. Elena's ship was a small diplomatic vessel, nothing like the warships that were secretly moving through space toward their targets. As she prepared for the journey back to Earth, she thought about the message she would have to deliver to the human government. The public would be told about the Council's decision, about the quarantine, about the end of human expansion into the galaxy. But there would be another message, delivered in secret to the right people. A message that would tell them the time for diplomacy was over. The aliens had chosen fear over friendship, control over cooperation. Now they would learn what humans were really capable of when their backs were against the wall. Elena's ship lifted off from the space station and turned toward the long journey home. Behind her, the alien representatives were already planning how to divide up the resources that humanity would no longer be allowed to access. They were celebrating their victory over the dangerous humans. They had no idea that across the galaxy, human ships were already moving toward their targets. Ships built in secret, crewed by volunteers and commanded by officers who had spent decades studying alien weaknesses. The Council had made their decision, but humanity had made theirs too. The war for galactic freedom was about to begin, and the aliens had just given humanity the perfect excuse to start it. Admiral Sarah Chen floated in zero gravity in the command center of Kuiper Station Omega, watching the largest holographic display ever built by human hands. The image showed something that officially did not exist. Humanity's true military power spread across the outer edges of the solar system. For 30 years, while diplomats like Elena Vasquez had played nice with the Galactic Council, human engineers and military planners had been building a secret empire in the cold darkness beyond Neptune. Asteroid mining operations that the aliens thought were simple resource gathering had actually been massive construction projects. Lost colony ships that had supposedly failed had actually been sent to build hidden bases in empty star systems. Sarah looked at the numbers on her display and felt proud of what humanity had accomplished. The Titan shipyards, hidden inside Saturn's rings where alien sensors couldn't detect them, had built over 3,000 warships. The Europa Research Facility had developed weapons and defense systems that used technology the Council believed humans didn't possess. And scattered throughout the outer solar system, 96 secret bases housed the crews that would operate this hidden fleet. Admiral, we're receiving confirmation signals from all fleet commanders, reported Lieutenant Commander Jackson, his voice steady despite the historic moment they were living through. Fleet Admiral Torres reports the Vanguard fleet is already 3 months into their journey toward the Centauri. Nexus, Captain Zhang Wei, confirms the Pathfinder Squadron has established supply depots in 17 systems and recruited volunteers from 14 different species. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of command on her shoulders. As Supreme Fleet Commander, she was responsible for coordinating the largest military operation in human history. But unlike the aliens who commanded through fear and bureaucracy, Sarah led volunteers who had chosen to risk everything for freedom. She touched a control on her command chair, and the display zoomed in on her own fleet. 240 ships of various sizes, all painted black to blend into the darkness of space. The crews called themselves the Liberation Fleet, and their mission was the most dangerous of all: They would strike directly at the heart of Council power while the other fleets created chaos throughout the galaxy. "Show me the crew reports," Sarah ordered, and the display changed to show personnel files for the 40,000 humans who would crew her ships. Unlike the professional soldiers that most species used, Sarah's people came from every walk of life. Former asteroid miners who knew how to work in dangerous conditions, scientists who had been rejected by the Council's research programs because their ideas were too radical, engineers who had been told their inventions were too advanced for humanity to be allowed to have. But most importantly, they were all volunteers who had grown up listening to stories about the Council's attitude toward humanity. They had heard their parents talk about how alien diplomats spoke to humans like they were children who didn't know any better. They had watched Council trade agreements that cheated human colonies out of fair prices for their goods. They had seen talented humans rejected from galactic universities because other species thought humans learned too quickly and might upset the balance. "Admiral, incoming priority message from Earth," announced Communications Officer Park. "Ambassador Vasquez has transmitted the Council's official decision." Sarah wasn't surprised by the news. Human intelligence had known the verdict would be guilty long before the trial began. What mattered now was how quickly they could move. "Signal all fleets," Sarah ordered. "Operation Eclipse is now active. All commanders are authorized to begin combat operations at their discretion." As her orders raced through space toward human fleets scattered across the galaxy, Sarah thought about the advantages her people had over their enemies. The Council species had grown soft during centuries of peace enforced by their bureaucratic system. Their military forces were designed for police work and intimidation, not real warfare against an equal enemy. But humans had studied every war in galactic history. They had analyzed every battle, every strategy, every tactical innovation developed by any species over thousands of years, and then they had improved on all of it. Human ships were smaller than Council vessels, but they were faster and more maneuverable. Where alien ships relied on massive firepower and heavy armor, human ships used speed, stealth, and advanced electronic warfare systems. Most importantly, human ships were equipped with adaptive artificial intelligence that could learn from each battle and develop new tactics in real time. The aliens feared human AI because they thought it might rebel and destroy its creators. What they didn't understand was that human AI was designed to work with humans, not replace them. Every human ship had an AI partner that could process information faster than any biological brain. But the humans made the final decisions. It was the perfect combination of artificial speed and human intuition. "Admiral, we're receiving volunteer applications from non-human species," reported Intelligence Officer Rodriguez. "Apparently word is spreading through the underground networks that humans are offering advanced medical technology and defensive weapons to any species willing to join the fight against Council." "Oppression," Sarah smiled. This was exactly what human planners had hoped would happen. The Council maintained power by keeping their member species dependent and grateful for protection, but there were hundreds of species in the galaxy that the Council had rejected for membership, either because they were too primitive or too independent. These species had been struggling to develop their technology and defend themselves without help. Now humans were offering them something the Council never would: partnership instead of protection. Advanced technology shared freely instead of doled out carefully to maintain dependence. And most importantly, the chance to fight for their own freedom instead of accepting whatever scraps the Council decided to give them. "How many applications are we talking about?" Sarah asked. "Over 2 million individuals from 43 different species," Rodriguez replied. "And that's just in the first 6 hours since Ambassador Vasquez's transmission reached the outer systems." Sarah felt a surge of hope. Humanity was outnumbered by the Council species, but they wouldn't be fighting alone. Every species that had been rejected, ignored, or exploited by the Council would have a reason to join the human cause. "Prepare to move the fleet," Sarah ordered. "Signal Admiral Torres that we're beginning our advance toward Council space. And send a message to Captain Janeway. Tell him it's time to activate all the resistance cells his people have been building in the outer rim systems." As Kuiper Station Omega began the complex process of launching the Liberation Fleet, Sarah looked one last time at the holographic display showing humanity's secret military empire. In a few hours, it would no longer be secret. The galaxy would know that humans had been preparing for this moment for decades. The Council thought they had sentenced humanity to life in prison. Instead, They had just declared war on the most adaptable, innovative, and stubborn species in the galaxy. Sarah almost felt sorry for them, almost. Captain Elena Rodriguez drifted silently in the pilot's seat of the stealth cruiser Shadowhawk, watching the Zephyrian patrol fleet through her ship's sensors. For 3 days, she and her crew had been floating dead in space, all systems powered down except for passive sensors and life support. To any alien scanner, they looked like just another piece of space debris in the asteroid field around Kepler 442. The Zephyrians had no idea they were being watched. Their patrol patterns were lazy and predictable, following the same routes they had used for decades. Why would they need to be careful? The Galactic Council had told them the galaxy was at peace, that all threats had been contained or eliminated. Elena smiled grimly as she studied the alien ships. The Zephyrians were typical Council species, overconfident, bureaucratic, and completely unprepared for real combat. Their ships were big and impressive-looking, but Elena could see the design flaws that human engineers had identified years ago. Weak spots in the armor, sensor blind spots, communication systems that could be jammed or hacked. "Captain, we're receiving the go signal from Fleet Command," whispered Communications Specialist Torres, keeping his voice low even though there was no way the aliens could hear them. Elena nodded and activated her neural implant, connecting her mind directly to the ship's computer systems. This was the technology the Council had banned as unnatural, the ability for humans to interface directly with their machines. What the aliens saw as corruption of the natural order, humans saw as the next step in evolution. Through her implant, Elena could feel the Shadowhawk respond to her thoughts. The ship's engines came online silently, using a new propulsion system that the Council scientists insisted was impossible. The weapon systems activated, targeting the alien vessels with precision that no biological gunner could match. And most importantly, the electronic warfare suite began its work, quietly infiltrating the Zephyrian communication networks. Elena's ship wasn't alone. Scattered throughout the asteroid field, 19 other human vessels began their coordinated attack. The Pathfinder Squadron had been operating in this region for 2 years, studying alien tactics and preparing for this moment. The attack began exactly as planned. Human boarding pods, launched from concealed positions, struck the Zephyrian ships before their crews could react. The pods used adaptive camouflage to blend in with space debris until the moment of impact. Then cutting lasers opened holes in the alien hulls. Elena watched through her ship's sensors as human marines poured into the Zephyrian vessels. These weren't the enhanced super soldiers that alien propaganda claimed humans had created. They were regular people, former asteroid miners, security guards, and military volunteers who had trained for this mission. But they wore powered armor that enhanced their strength and speed, and they carried weapons designed specifically to disable alien technology without killing the crews. The key to the human strategy was speed and precision. Instead of trying to destroy the alien ships, they captured them intact. Instead of killing the crews, they secured them safely and began gathering intelligence from their computer systems. Most importantly, they rescued the cargo these ships had been guarding. "Captain, you need to see this," called out Marine Sergeant Kim over the communication link from one of the captured ships. "These aren't military vessels. They're slavers." Elena felt her anger rise as the reports came in from the other captured ships. The Zephyrian patrol fleet was actually running a slave operation, collecting members of primitive species from unprotected worlds and selling them to council members who needed cheap labor. The cargo holds were full of beings from a dozen different species, all of them weak and terrified from months of captivity. This was exactly what human intelligence had suspected, but never been able to prove. The Council's protection was a lie. While they publicly preached peace and harmony, they privately allowed slavery, exploitation, and worse. Member species stayed quiet about these crimes because they were either benefiting from them or too afraid to speak up. Elena connected to the ship-wide communication system and broadcast a message on all frequencies that the liberated slaves could understand. "You are free. The humans have come to help you. We will return you to your homes and give you the tools to defend yourselves." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Beings who had been told that humans were violent monsters saw human Marines providing medical care, food, and gentle treatment. Species that had never heard of humans before learned that these strange bipeds had risked their lives to free slaves that no one else cared about. But Elena knew the real work was just beginning. Her ships began broadcasting a different message, this one aimed at every species in the region. The Galactic Council has lied to you. They are not protectors. They are exploiters. Humanity offers you something different: freedom to develop your own technology, freedom to govern yourselves, and freedom to decide your own future. Join us, and we will help you break the chains of Council control. The message was backed up with gifts that proved human sincerity, medical technology that could cure diseases the Council claimed were incurable, defensive weapons that could protect colonies from raiders. Most importantly, educational materials that would help primitive species develop their own industries instead of depending on Council charity. Elena's communication officer looked up from his station with excitement. "Captain, we're getting responses from 27 different species in this sector alone. They're asking how they can help fight the Council." "Tell them to spread the word," Elena replied. "Every species that joins us makes the galaxy a little more free." As Elena's squadron prepared to move to their next target, she thought about how this attack would look to the Council. Their comfortable assumption about human nature would be shattered. Instead of the aggressive conquerors they expected, they would find liberators who fought to free the oppressed rather than to gain territory. But Elena knew the aliens would learn slowly. They had spent so many centuries in their rigid hierarchies that they couldn't imagine a different way of thinking. They would see human victories and assume humans wanted to replace the Council as galactic rulers. They wouldn't understand that humans wanted to eliminate the entire system of galactic rule. "Set course for the Rigel system," Elena ordered. "Intelligence reports that the Granite Lords are using asteroid miners from primitive species as unpaid labor. Time to give those miners some better job opportunities." As the Shadowhawk and her escort ship slipped away into the darkness between stars, they left behind a very different situation than they had found. The slave ships were now rescue vessels carrying freed captives back to their homeworlds along with human advisors who would help them build defenses. The Zephyrian crews were in secure custody, but they were being treated well and given access to evidence of their government's crimes. Most importantly, the word was spreading throughout the Outer Rim. Humanity had returned to the galaxy, and they were fighting for everyone's freedom. Elena smiled as she settled in for the long journey to Rigel. The Council had made a serious mistake when they tried to cage humanity. They had assumed that humans would react like any other species, with submission, negotiation, or at worst futile rebellion. Instead, they had awakened something the galaxy had never seen before, a species that fought not for conquest, but for the radical idea that every being deserved to be free. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood before the largest gathering of different species ever assembled in one place. The converted space station that had once been a hegemony slave processing center now bustled with representatives from over 200 species, many of whom the Galactic Council had never even acknowledged as intelligent life. The irony wasn't lost on Elena. 6 months ago, she had stood in the Council's pristine chamber and been condemned by species who claimed to represent galactic civilization. Now she was in a rough industrial facility that had been built to process slaves, but the beings around her were more free than any Council member had ever been. "The intelligence we've gathered changes everything we thought we knew about the galaxy," Elena announced to the assembled delegates. Her words were translated instantly into hundreds of languages by the advanced AI systems that humanity had shared freely with their new allies. The holographic display behind Elena showed financial records, communication intercepts, and trade agreements that human intelligence operatives had gathered from captured Council facilities. The information painted a picture that shocked even Elena, who had suspected the worst about the Council's true nature. "The Galactic Council isn't a government," Elena continued. "It's a protection racket on a galactic scale. They keep member species dependent by controlling access to technology, resources, and trade routes. Any species that becomes too independent or asks too many questions gets labeled as aggressive or dangerous and either absorbed into the Council system or eliminated." A delegate from the Christic Union, a species of living mineral beings, projected a question through the translation system. "But surely some Council members are innocent. Our intelligence suggests many species joined willingly for protection." Elena nodded gravely. "That's what makes the Council's system so effective. Most member species genuinely believe they're part of a benevolent organization. But look at these trade agreements." The display showed hundreds of documents that revealed the truth. Species that joined the council were required to sell their resources at fixed prices far below market value. They were forbidden from developing certain technologies that might make them self-sufficient. Most importantly, they were required to contribute military forces for peacekeeping operations that were actually raids against independent species. The beautiful part of the council's system, Elena explained, is that most members never see the violence. They're told their ships are maintaining peace, but they don't know their forces are being used to crush species that refuse to submit to council authority. A representative from the Forge Worlds, a group of industrial planets that had been producing weapons for human forces, stood up. This explains why the council was so afraid of humanity. You never asked for protection. You developed your own technology, and worst of all, you asked questions about why things had to work the way they did. Elena smiled grimly. Exactly. Humanity was always going to be a threat to the council system. Not because we're violent, but because we're independent. The council couldn't afford to let other species see an example of successful self-determination. The gathering was interrupted by an urgent communication from Admiral Chen's flagship. Ambassador, we're receiving surrender requests from 7 council fleets. Apparently our intelligence broadcasts are having more effect than we anticipated. Elena felt a surge of hope. The human strategy was working better than anyone had dared to expect. Instead of trying to defeat the council through pure military force, humanity was using information warfare to destroy the legitimacy that held the council system together. Every time human forces captured a council facility, they immediately broadcast all the records they found, financial documents showing how council leaders had enriched themselves at their members' expense, military orders revealing the true purpose of peacekeeping missions, communication intercepts proving that the council had deliberately kept member species technologically backward to maintain control. The effect was devastating. Species that had served the council faithfully for centuries were learning that they had been used as tools of oppression. Military commanders who thought they were heroes of galactic peace discovered they had actually been enforcing a system of exploitation. How many defections are we seeing? Elena asked. Current estimates suggest that 40% of council military forces have either switched sides or refused orders to attack human targets, Admiral Chen reported. More importantly, we're seeing entire planetary governments declaring independence from council authority. Elena turned back to the assembled delegates. This is our opportunity. The council system is collapsing, but we need to be ready with something better to replace it. The debate that followed would have been impossible under the council system. Representatives from primitive species that the council had dismissed as not ready for civilization offered insights that impressed delegates from advanced technological societies. Species that had been enemies under council manipulation discovered they had far more in common than they had differences. But the most important voice belonged to a small, furry creature that had been rescued from a council slave facility just weeks earlier. Her species had been classified as semi-intelligent by council scientists and used as experimental subjects in medical research. I speak for all the small ones, she said through the translation system, her voice barely above a whisper but somehow commanding attention from the entire assembly. For too long, the big ones have decided what was best for us without asking what we wanted. The humans are the first big ones who ever asked us what we thought. Please don't become like the council. Don't decide for us. Ask us. The chamber fell silent as every delegate considered her words. Elena felt tears forming in her eyes as she realized what the small creature had identified: the fundamental difference between human values and council values. The council believed that superior species had the right to rule inferior ones for their own good. Humans believed that every species had the right to determine its own destiny, regardless of their level of technology or political development. That's our constitution right there, Elena announced. Every species has the right to self-determination. Every being has the right to be heard. No one gets to decide what's best for someone else without their consent. The vote to form the Free Systems Alliance was unanimous, but more importantly, it was enthusiastic. For the first time in galactic history, an interstellar organization was being created based on voluntary cooperation instead of conquest or coercion. But Elena knew their work was far from over. As reports came in from across the galaxy, it became clear that the Council's inner systems were finally mobilizing their full military might. The old order wouldn't go quietly. And the real test of the alliance would come when they faced the concentrated power of species that had grown wealthy and comfortable under the council system. "Admiral Chen," Elena said into her communicator, "how long until the council's core fleets reach our position?" "Intelligence estimates 6 weeks, Ambassador. They're mobilizing everything they have, over 10,000 ships from their most loyal member species." Elena looked around at the diverse assembly of beings who had chosen freedom over security, uncertainty over oppression. They were about to face the largest military force in galactic history, commanded by species who genuinely believed they were fighting to preserve peace and order. "Then we'd better make sure we're ready to give them a proper welcome," Elena said. "Send word to all human fleets. It's time to show the galaxy what real freedom looks like." Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching through the massive view screen as 10,000 Council warships filled the space around Nexus Prime. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history, representing every major species in the Council, and many smaller ones who had been convinced that destroying humanity was necessary to preserve galactic peace. "Admiral, incoming transmission from Supreme Chancellor Vexithera," reported Communications Officer Park. "She's demanding our immediate surrender." Sarah almost laughed. Even now, facing the largest human fleet ever assembled, the Council still thought they could end this war with words and threats. They still didn't understand what they were really fighting. "Put her through," Sarah ordered. The view screen changed to show Chancellor Vexithera's silver face, twisted with anger and frustration. Behind her, Sarah could see other Council leaders from dozens of species, all looking confident in their overwhelming numerical advantage. "Admiral Chen," the Chancellor said, her voice carrying the cold authority of someone used to absolute obedience. "You have 30 minutes to order all human forces to surrender unconditionally. In return, we will allow your species to return to Sol System and live under proper supervision. Refuse and we will destroy every human ship in this system." Sarah looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. They were scared. Any sane person would be scared facing odds like these. But she also saw determination, resolve, and something the Council forces would never understand: genuine belief in what they were fighting for. "Chancellor," Sarah replied calmly, "I appreciate the offer, but I'm afraid we'll have to decline. You see, we're not just fighting for humanity anymore. We're fighting for everyone your system has oppressed for centuries, and we have some friends who'd like to have a word with you." Sarah gestured to her communications officer, who opened channels to dozens of other ships in the human fleet. But when the signals connected, the faces that appeared on screen weren't all human. Captain Elena Rodriguez appeared from the bridge of the Shadowhawk, but standing beside her was the commander of a Christek Union warship that had joined the human fleet. Admiral Torres was visible from his flagship, but his tactical officer was a former Council military commander who had defected when he learned the truth about their operations. Most shocking of all was the image from the newest addition to the human fleet. The former Council dreadnought Harmony's End, now commanded by its original captain but flying under Alliance colors after its crew had mutinied rather than fire on liberated slave colonies. "As you can see," Sarah continued, "this isn't just a human rebellion anymore. It's a revolution, and revolutions have a funny way of spreading." Even as she spoke, Sarah's sensors were picking up something that made her heart race with hope. The massive Council fleet was beginning to show signs of disorder. Ships were breaking formation, some turning away from their assigned positions, others simply powering down their weapons. The reason became clear when Admiral Chen's intelligence officer looked up from his console with amazement. "Admiral, we're receiving over 3,000 individual surrender requests from Council ships. Their crews are refusing orders to attack." Sarah wasn't surprised. For months, human forces had been broadcasting the financial records, communications, and evidence they had gathered from captured Council facilities. Every piece of information that exposed the true nature of the Council system had been transmitted across the galaxy on every frequency, in every language, through every communication network that human hackers could access. The effect had been devastating to Council morale. Ship crews that had believed they were fighting for galactic peace discovered they were actually defending a system that kept their own species poor and dependent. Military officers who thought they were heroes learned they had been unknowing tools of oppression. "It's not just individuals," reported Intelligence Officer Rodriguez. "We're showing entire fleet formations powering down. The Hegemony Third Fleet just announced they're switching sides. The Crystal Gardens Defense Force is declaring neutrality, and the Deep Current Alliance, they're asking for permission to arrest their own government representatives." Sarah watched the tactical display as the massive council fleet began to dissolve before her eyes. But she knew the most dangerous part was still to come. The core council species, the ones who had built their wealth and power on the current system, would never surrender willingly. "Admiral, the remaining council forces are regrouping around Chancellor Vexithara's flagship," reported Tactical Officer Kim. "Approximately 2,000 ships, mostly from the inner systems." Sarah nodded. These would be the true believers, the species who genuinely thought the council system was best for the galaxy, or the ones who had profited too much from exploitation to give it up voluntarily. "All ships prepare for battle," Sarah ordered. "But remember, we're not trying to destroy them. We're trying to free them." The battle that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. Human ships, supported by their Alliance allies, used tactics that the Council forces had never encountered. Instead of trying to win through superior firepower, they used speed, coordination, and electronic warfare to isolate Council ships and force them to surrender. The turning point came when Elena Vasquez, now commanding a diplomatic vessel surrounded by ships from dozens of species, broadcast a message that reached every ship in the system. But this wasn't a message of military threats or political demands. "To every being fighting in this battle," Elena said, her voice calm and clear despite the chaos around her,
"I want you to see something." The transmission showed financial records from the personal accounts of the Council's leadership.
Numbers so large they were almost incomprehensible, representing wealth that had been extracted from member species over centuries. Luxury facilities hidden in secret star systems where Council leaders lived like kings while their people struggled with artificial scarcity. But most damaging of all were the communications between Council leaders discussing their member species like livestock, debating which planets to exploit next and which populations to relocate when they became inconvenient. The effect was immediate. Even ships from the inner systems began powering down their weapons as crews realized they had been fighting to preserve a system that saw them as resources to be managed, rather than citizens to be served. Supreme Chancellor Vexithara's flagship was the last to surrender, surrounded by hundreds of human and Alliance vessels but no longer supported by the fleet that had brought her to battle. When she finally appeared on screen to offer her surrender, her silver skin seemed dull and lifeless. "You have destroyed everything," she said bitterly. "The galaxy was peaceful under our guidance. Now there will be chaos, war, suffering." Sarah looked at the defeated Chancellor with something approaching pity. "Chancellor, there was never peace under your system." There was only silence, the silence of the oppressed who were too afraid to speak, but now they have their voices back. As if to prove her point, the communication channels filled with voices from across the galaxy. Species that had been silent for centuries were speaking up, sharing their stories of exploitation and abuse under Council rule. But more importantly, they were talking to each other, forming connections and alliances that had been impossible under the rigid hierarchy of the Council system. "The chaos you're worried about?" Sarah continued. "That's just the sound of freedom. It's messy and loud and complicated, but it's real. Your peace was an illusion built on fear and control." In the hours that followed, the work of building a new galaxy began. The Free Systems Alliance moved quickly to establish communication networks, trade agreements, and defense pacts that were based on voluntary cooperation rather than imposed authority. Species that had been enemies under Council manipulation discovered they could be friends when no one was forcing them to compete for resources. But the most important moment came when representatives from the defeated Council species were invited to join the Alliance as equals. Some refused, choosing to retreat to their home systems and try to maintain their old ways. But many others, especially the younger generation who had grown up questioning the system they inherited, chose to embrace the new order. Elena Vasquez found herself once again addressing a galactic assembly, but this time every species had an equal voice. The chamber was chaotic, with dozens of debates happening simultaneously in hundreds of languages. But it was the chaos of democracy, of beings finally free to speak their minds and determine their own futures. 6 months ago, Elena said to the assembly, the Galactic Council declared that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed freedom. They were right about one thing: we were dangerous. But not in the way they thought. We were dangerous to their system of control and oppression. We were dangerous because we proved that another way was possible. As Elena spoke, reports continued to arrive from across the galaxy. Former slave colonies were building their own governments. Primitive species were developing technologies that the Council had kept from them for centuries. And everywhere, beings who had never been allowed to make their own choices were learning what freedom really meant. The galaxy had learned a lesson that would echo through history.